Korga, and I am Executive Director and President of the Piłsudski Institute, and I would like to welcome you very much to today's evening presentation. First of all, I would like to welcome our special guest, Robert Reiss. Thank you very much for choosing our institution and being with us today. I welcome you very much. Hello, Robert. And Professor Tomasz Pudłocki, because without him nothing will happen. So welcome, Tomek. Also, we have a special guest today. Marek Skolimowski, President of the Kosciuszko Foundation, is with us. Of course, we are happy to have you all. If you are here first time, I hope that you will come back. We have certain programs in Polish and in English. Please sign into our list and you will be receiving information, and we hope that you can join us on other events. So today, it is a special day because we will have book talk. The book talk is based on the book written by Robert Reiss. It's about his mother, and the book is titled Elizabeth Munk Clark, Her Life and Her Poetry. You can see this book here. It's here. And it is done together with institution in Poland. Tomek remind me, especially, can I say it in Polish? Towarzystwo Przyjaciół Nauk w Przemyślu. This book happened to be co-sponsored by that institution from Poland and by the work of Tomek and his friends. So yes, in Przemyśl, yes. So I will talk a little bit about Robert because he's the main star of today's evening, and then a little about Tomasz. So Robert Reiss is one of Elizabeth Munk Clark and Ernest Reiss, two sons. He and his brother Stefan were raised in their Polish-American family home in New York City following their parents' relocation to the United States after the beginning of Second World War in Poland in 1939. Robert is a physician, and he recently finished his appointments at Columbia University Medical Center and the New York Blood Center, where he served as a professor of clinical pathology and clinical medicine and chief medical officer and vice president. Until 2005, he also served in the United States Army Reserve Medical Corps, retiring with the rank of colonel. And I understand that during a free time, you spend your time researching your family roots, and you found a lot of beautiful information about your mother and about the history and what happened in Poland, because I understand that this part of history is very much new to the whole family, what Elizabeth did in Poland. So I would not reveal the story because this will be the subject of the talk. And Professor Tomasz Pudłocki from Jagiellonian University will talk with Robert about the book, about Elizabeth, about her life in Krakow, in the United States, in New York City. And if you happen to have that book, there is a beautiful poetry. And I have looked through it, I have read it, and it's really outstanding. I'm not a poetry person, but this is really beautiful. So I will encourage all of you to read the poetry from the book. So I will give the floor to Professor Pudłocki and to Robert. You can come up here, and you will take it from there. And I want to welcome you again.
So before we start, I would like to say a couple of words. So, as a matter of fact, it's a pure coincidence that we both met. With all respect, Robert, you could be my at least father. I know that your children and grandchildren are together with you, and this is absolutely spectacular. Guys, I know that you are mostly in American Italian, and let's say because Giovanna is also with us today, because of Ferrara, and of course because Robert also studied in Italy. But now we are not in Italy, today we are in New York City and trying to combine these different places. So, as a matter of fact, I was browsing the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation. That's why the president of the Kosciuszko Foundation is with us today. And it was the Great Depression, yeah, so 1929 and onwards. If we think that we somehow experience a bad economy for the last couple of years, we are definitely mistaken. There's nothing when we try to compare it with the Great Depression of the beginning of 1930s. And here we have a young lady from Watertown, New York, exploring and finding herself from Syracuse to Watertown, maybe Berkeley. Why Berkeley? Because the very good Slavic department was at the University of California with Professor Noyes. So Elizabeth was not thinking about being a Polish specialist or specialist in interpretation. She was just trying to find her place. And this is how she found Noyes, Berkeley, and this is how she came across with the Kosciuszko Foundation. This is, as I said, 1930-31, and this is not a very good time for the world. The Kosciuszko Foundation is trying to find exceptional individuals, showing that this is really worthy to co-sponsor to these exchange programs to Poland. And Elizabeth Munk Clark was a very special person. She had no Polish heritage. At the beginning of the 1940s, it was very hard to explain to Polish people that, with all respect, maybe Polish is difficult. Maybe Polish is very hard to pronounce, but even Americans could speak it fluently. Especially young people could be interpreters, because she was, as a member of the Noyes interpreting group. And this is how she was sponsored to go to Krakow, to study at Jagiellonian University, English and Polish. Not only once, not only for a year, but for 3 years. It was very, very rare in that time that Stefan Mizwa, so the founder of the Kosciuszko Foundation, granted 3-year program for one individual. And what happened? A love story happened. Now everybody loves love stories, especially when you are speaking about the Great Depression. So how was going on in Krakow during the very bad times? How Krakow was so exceptional, how she was trying to deal with all these difficulties. So parents in Watertown, with all respect to Watertown, very far away, she was exploring herself, being a young lady in her 20s, and she found a love. It was not very difficult because she was a Protestant, he was a Catholic. Very far away, one thing. She didn't succeed in humanities, but she was one of the best journalists of her epoch, and this is how I met her. Years passed. I thought that the history of Elizabeth Clark just disappeared. And then, I think 3 years ago, it was still COVID. I remember my first visit in your house. Giovanna was COVID positive. So it was quite scary, let's say it frankly. Then we met in Krakow with Robert, and I was COVID positive. Robert survived, Giovanna and me, and he was also COVID positive this year. So the COVID is always between us, and this is how we met. I was browsing some information on the internet looking for Elizabeth Clark because I was doing it also every single time. She was really somebody. Krakówna, she was called by the Polonia. She was always in the press in Poland, in Katowice, Krakow, showing why it's important to learn English, to explore America, etc., etc. And in Polonian American press here, as a star. Yes, Polish is hard, but still you can do it. And this is how I come across with the article of Robert. And we just started our communication, and I think today friendship. I knew that Robert was thinking about publishing the second volume of enlarged story of her mother, and was looking for a publishing house. This is what happened after 3 years of our cooperation. I hope you like the book. On the cover there is extraordinary sketch made in Medyka. Medyka is a very small place, very close by to Przemyśl, my hometown. That is why I encourage my colleagues from the Society of Friends of Learning that maybe we can just publish it. Because of the generosity of Robert, we did it. This is absolutely great, and the whole collection of letters of Elizabeth, Ernest, so the parents of Stefan and Robert, all the collection was donated to Piłsudski Institute. That is why Iwona Koga was so gracious to organize the book launch also here. So today the story of the Kosciuszko Foundation grantee, the mother of Robert and Stefan, the person I was interested in as a scholar, and the person whose collection you can also have here because of the generosity of Robert. Here in the Institute of Piłsudski is also here, and you can still admire a wonderful book, which is a kind of commemorative book to the mother by her son. Robert, I think this is the highest time for you to say a couple of words about your mother and about these absolutely amazing photos and some stories behind.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk about my mother. Before starting, I would like to thank Dr. Koga for hosting this and also for enabling the family to find a home for our heritage and our archives that are housed here and are open for all of the family members when they would like to come to see what's in the archives to visit. So especially for that, thank you very much. You are preserving my Polish heritage. It is also a pleasure to note, a special pleasure, that the president of the Kosciuszko Foundation is here because it is really because of the foundation that I have a Polish heritage and perhaps that I have a life. So thank you very much. Let me just start by saying when we grew up, my brother Stefan, who is here, and I, we knew my mother as Elizabeth Clark Reiss. Her married name. We knew her as a very busy professional woman who was also taking care of an invalid husband and two growing children. So she was very, very busy. What we knew about her life before we were born was really pretty much limited to her childhood and her years in Poland as she interpreted them, which was always talking about the Reiss family, my father and his family. Only a little bit did I ever learn about my mother. All of this came and changed after my mother's death in 2001 as we were going through her papers. And I began to find photographs with people that I seemed to know from the distant past, and particularly poems scribbled on the back of envelopes and little pieces of paper, which were sonnets written to her husband, who died in 1958. She always considered herself to be married until she died in 2001. And these were love sonnets that she wrote 2 years later after my father's death. Also, I began to find clippings of newspapers, and particularly some of the things of her activities, both before leaving Poland, during her years in Poland, about her and not about my father and not about the Reiss family. And I also found clippings from her years working with the Polish Information Center and began to see her as a Polish patriot and as a poet, something that we knew nothing about as we were growing. So with that, I'd like to go back then and talk about Elizabeth Munk Clark, which is the woman that I never really knew. So she was born in a very modest family in Watertown, and in 1929 25, went to Syracuse University, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in English literature. Following which she went to the University of Wisconsin to do her master's in English literature, and then enrolled in a PhD in comparative literature at Wisconsin. She became interested in Slavic languages, and having heard about the opportunity to perhaps apply for a fellowship through the Kosciuszko Foundation to go to Poland, she went to Berkeley to spend a year at the University of California in Berkeley, both learning the rudiments of Polish as well as studying Polish literature. She won the fellowship for 1 year and was going to Krakow to do research on Mickiewicz because her studies were going to be on a comparison of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Mickiewicz. This is Professor Noyes, who encouraged her and actually continued to mentor her even as during the years that she ended up in Poland. He had many contacts, particularly with Professor Pudłocki in Krakow at the Jagiellonian University. And so it was he that encouraged her and essentially drove her future career. She arrived in Poland in the fall of 1931, and here we have a picture of my mother with the purse standing near Professor Pudłocki. That is a picture of the English Club. Later that year, she was elected president of the English Club. Standing behind her, many of you might recognize Ludwig Jagiellonski, who later became then, of course, the cultural attaché of the Polish government, and then later a professor of Slavic languages at Columbia and founder of the modern Polish Review. The two of them remained lifelong friends. Among the first people that she met in one of her first classes was my father. My father, Ernest Reiss, was the son of a musicologist who was also a professor at the university. In the beginning, I'm not certain they knew where this romance was going because my mother was only there for 1 year. However, after his death, she wrote this sonnet about her first day in class. And I won't try and read it, but it's pretty humorous because, in fact, who in college sits in the first row of the auditorium? But since she was still trying to have a grasp of Polish, she was trying to sit as close to the professor as possible to try and understand what was being said. In any case, my father did seek her out, and that probably influenced a lot of decisions that she made later on. During that first year, when she was originally intended to go back as a teaching assistant back to Berkeley, but those positions were all canceled because of the Depression and lack of funds. Given that, she elected to stay for another year because the foundation agreed to fund a second year for her. During the summer, her Polish had progressed to the point that she was invited by Michał Pudłocki to come to his estate in Medyka to translate one of his novels. At the same time, she was also asked by a playwright, Mazinski, who also was in the neighborhood to translate some of his plays. So we have a woman now in the space of now perhaps 9 months actually in Poland, whose Polish improved to the point that she was being asked to translate for well-known poets and authors. This is a picture of her, in fact, in Pudłocki's estate, translating his novel. As I said, the depression also caused even further delay. After a second and third year, there were still no positions available. And finally, my mother decided that she would take up permanent residence in Poland. I'm certain that the evolving relationship with my father also had something to do with that. She re-enrolled at the university, not as a visiting student, but as a regular PhD candidate in comparative literature at the Jagiellonian University, where she remained for 2 more years, trying to complete her thesis, which was never finished. Her thesis notes are actually now in the library at the University of California. Perhaps had I known how things would have evolved personally, they'd be resting here rather than in Berkeley, but that's where they are. By 1937, her mother had died. She realized she had no more future in the United States, and she and my father were married. He was a musicologist and a journalist in Katowice, working for Polska Zakładnia. She then moved to Katowice and took a position as the confidential secretary to the English Vice Consul in Katowice. She had quite a bit of experience with the exodus after the Anschluss in Austria, and with all of the refugees coming up into Poland from Czechoslovakia and Austria. That experience probably influenced her later career. At any rate, in 1938, my father was assigned to come to New York to cover the New York World's Fair. My mother preceded him because he had difficulty obtaining a visa. So I was born here in December of 1938. My father followed in 1939. And once here, of course, the war ensued and they did not return. My father then sought work here and became one of the assistant editors of Nowy Świat, and worked with the newspaper here for 2 years when he developed multiple sclerosis and had to retire. My mother now had to look for a job, and her only skills really were in translating. And we therefore had to move to Providence, Rhode Island, where she worked for the International Institute there as their Slavic translator. At the time, the International Institute was working with the Polish communities in Pawtucket and Providence and Central Falls. And she basically was essentially the cultural link between them. This is a picture of my mother for the annual ball in 1942 at the International Institute. She continued to work there until 1944, when she was then recruited to come to New York to work for the Polish government, the London government, at the Polish Information Center. And her position there was as senior translator, and essentially was working to support the effort of the Polish Review to transform itself from essentially a political magazine to also a cultural journal. And so she was at the forefront trying to present Polish literature to the American public through her work with the Polish Review. She translated the works of many of the important Polish poets who were now in residence or in exile in the United States or in London, and also published this translation of the Battle Song of Warsaw, which was broadcast on the underground station Lightning, and this was broadcast actually the night before the following day when the Germans discovered the broadcast station and destroyed the station and killed all the patriots there. I will pause. Maybe you can read it. If I read it, I begin to cry when I get. I'm sorry. So maybe just a moment, just reading. I think somebody who just speaks Polish but is not a patriot would not be able to translate it the way she did. At any rate, she also was able to publish some of her own poetry. This poem by her actually refers to the Mongol invasion of 73 or 37, when the Mongols invaded what's now Ukraine, and at the time was Greater Poland. And so, again, she is praying that Poland will be safe. With the end of the war, she no longer had a position, of course, with the Polish Information Center, which was closing, and indeed her life needed to completely change. She went back to school to study some social work. One of the last acts that she did, however, in New York was, this is the statue of King Jagiellon that was in front of the Polish Pavilion at the World's Fair and was put into storage during the war. At the conclusion of the war, the London government presented to the city of New York the statue, and my mother was selected to write the acceptance speech of Mayor LaGuardia for the acceptance of the statue, which is, most of you know now, resides in Central Park. So her life now changed, and now we knew her as Elizabeth Clark Reiss. This is the woman we knew growing up. She was recruited to be the assistant executive director of a new organization, which is a coordinating body for all the voluntary agencies' relief efforts in Europe after the war. Her particular assignment was, of course, the reconstruction and deliverance of aid to Germany. There was also committees for France, for Italy, for the Balkans. Obviously, the job in Germany was much, much greater. She organized an on-the-ground organization called the Council of Relief Agencies licensed to operate in Germany, or KRELO. Their job started in 1946 and entailed provision of housing and food and medical care for essentially the entire German population, together with the 8 million Germans who were arriving from the east, with the redistricting, the redrawing of national boundaries, and the eviction of Germans who had moved into Poland, who were already resident also in what is now the Ukraine. Here, in fact, we see the feeding of refugees arriving from the east in Bavaria in early 1946. Her activities with Kralog were recognized by the German government after closing of the program in 1962 by a thank you. Germany thanks Kralog, as well as another organization that she championed, which is still in existence, and you all know is CARE when you talk about CARE projects. By the time Kralog had shut down, or actually in the first 3 years, it had distributed over 70,000 tons of relief supplies throughout Germany. And by the time the program closed, her agencies had distributed 300,000 tons for the reconstruction of Germany. Her activities continue. In the 1960s, President Kennedy was organizing the Food for Peace program. That was a program which the voluntary agencies were not particularly fond of because it had geopolitical overtones to it. The voluntary agencies insisted that they help then design the program and oversee its operation. This is a picture of my mother at the White House at a meeting of the Food for Peace program. So we remember her really as a child of working very long hours, coming home to take care of my father as well as to run a household. In 1964, I was studying in Italy. Here is a picture of my mother, I and my wife Giovanna, a cousin, Christina Reiss, who was a art restorer, and my mother, and many of you recognize in front of the college at the university. Finally, she had wanted to retire for a long time. My father had long since died, and but they insisted that she stay on for several terms as a acting director while new directors for the institute or for the council were found. She finally did resign and retire, and at her retirement, she's been presented a certificate of appreciation. One of the things here, though, at the retirement was that she received letters from all the different agencies. Most of them were typed letters of appreciation from the heads of the various agencies. Howard Kresge was with the United States AID, Agency for International Development Program, which is sort of had a colored checkered history. However, they did work together for quite a long time. And rather than sending something from the USA Aid, sent actually this wonderful letter, which really shows the value that people placed on her efforts, and also the fact that throughout that time, all of the people that she worked remained lifelong friends. In 1987, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of her marriage to my father. Here, many of our family that is not present today. This year, we had a celebration which was followed the receipt of an invitation, which were the exact copies of the wedding invitations that were sent out in 1937. apparently we had a much calmer 50th anniversary than is recorded of her original, more traditional Polish wedding that sort of went on and on and on as people dropped in and out and came back the next day and drank some more. Ours only lasted several hours. At any rate, that's her story very briefly. I'm certain there's a lot of little holes to be filled in. And I really thank you for the opportunity of telling you about her.
Thank you, Robert, for this absolutely amazing speech and wide show. I think it gives us all the opportunity at least to touch a bit the story of your mother. When you were speaking, it came to my mind that it's said that behind every great man stands a great woman. Who was standing behind Elizabeth if she was a widow so quickly?
Well, I'm not certain that she was a widow so quickly.
You know, we always said in 1958 you were just 20.
Well, it certainly wasn't me. She was a very strong woman. She also knew exactly what her place in the world had become. She had many, many friends. And I don't think that she needed any other major figure behind her because she always felt that she still had my father, even though my father has been dead for so many years.
Because now, when I was browsing the letters, I'm very grateful that you let me to get that she was a very fragile woman in love. And not like for a couple of weeks and months, but for years. Like, of course, I'm speaking about 1930s. So I remember us speaking about the picture of your mother you both had as a very strong, powerful, energetic, taking care of the family. And my feeling, which was totally different. Yeah? So it was already so hard in 1940s and 50s that she had to take responsibility. What about your father and how he felt being somehow dependent, mostly totally from your mother? How he felt in that point, in the 1940s and 50s?
Well, I think my father was physically dependent upon her, and indeed dependent on I and my brother. On the other hand, I think emotionally, it was a give and take. My father always remained the head of the house when it was home. It would be no other way. This was a Polish house. This was not a typical American house. We grew up in a very Polish house. We never learned to speak Polish. However, we did learn Polish courtesy. My wife always talks about my cousin kissing her hand when they first met in Poland, but we had to kiss the hand of the women who came to visit. We did not get up from the table without saying in Polish, "Dziękuję." We did not ever say if somebody came in and we entered it. It was always proszę. So the common courtesies were not just encouraged. This was a Polish home, and the only Polish we really knew is we could understand enough to know whether they were talking about us and we were in trouble or if things were okay. But Easter was only Polish. Wigilia before Christmas was Polish. My mother made wonderful mushroom pierogi. She made her own beet borscht. Easter was kielbasa and ham and all the egg slices, and a tradition that one of my sons hated was the sharing of the egg wedges as you go around the table. I'll tell you one story. This is long after, of course, my father died, but the traditions continued. My mother had gone back into the kitchen, and one of my sons took the dish of egg slices and put it underneath the table. My mother came back. She wanted to share the egg slices. And he said, "Oh, don't you remember, we've already done that." So I don't know how I can best explain. Most of the visitors we had, all of the adults, only spoke, we came, were Polish. Ludwig Szczytnowski came quite often. Interestingly, I always had thought that he was a friend of my father's family. It is only when I was researching pictures and found that all the pictures were of her, my mother, and him, that I realized that he was actually first a co-student or a colleague, and then a lifelong friend of her. We never knew that. We always thought that she was simply there and he was coming to see my father. Anyway,
Robert, so obvious question. So what happened that you were growing up in a Polish-American milieu, but at the same time you were not taught Polish? Okay, guys, for those of you who are not very good in American history, because this is a part of your country's history, Polish jokes were absolutely harmful for the Polish community, as well as the Slavic communities, especially in 1950s, 60s, or 70s. This is also your story, so you know, somehow you were not speaking Polish, or you were not taught Polish because of the Polish jokes, or it is something else?
No, we were at, I don't recall that we were never sat down and said, we really need to speak Polish. I think we understood generally enough to know what was important to us, and that was really whether we were in trouble or not. But outside of that, I think, I guess it was always Polish custom was more important than speaking Polish. I don't think there was one other fact. Immediately after the war, there had been some discussion about returning to Poland. My mother had been in touch with the British government to see, in fact, whether the consulate in Katowice would reopen, or what the staffing of the consulate in Krakow would be. Immediately after the war, many of you remember, there was a period of time where it was uncertain whether the Lublin government or the London government would have control, or whether some compromise would be met. So there was actually some optimism that there might be some opportunity. That discussion ended in part, as I understand from my mother, because my father did not want to return to Poland, because during the war, he could communicate, as you know, through the German Red Cross. It would take a long time, but letters could go back and forth. He had always told the lie that he was fine. And in fact, pictures would be sent back and forth, but there were always pictures of the family sitting down. In fact, I and my brother would always sit on either side of him, because we were actually propping him up. So my grandfather had always understood that everything was okay. He had great difficulty with the idea that he had told a lie to his father during the war. And therefore, there was some consideration that it is better off that they no longer see each other, and that my grandfather believed that he is fine and everything is as he had envisioned during the war. Then, of course, it became a moot point because they would return anyways. So,
More or less like that. Okay, Robert, because the time is flying out, and we would like to have an after party just immediately after the book launch. So maybe I'll just give the floor for people to ask some questions, and probably we'll be concluding soon. Yeah. So Robert is also with us for another couple of minutes. If you have any questions you'd like to share, because we're speaking on about a feature picture of Elizabeth Munk Clark. We're speaking about something from the family perspective, but maybe we missed something. So I think this is a wonderful time to ask questions to Robert or to members of the family who are also with us. Yes, Dr. Koga.
Maybe not a question, but we'll just turn to the audience. I was always curious with the languages, you know. So I see that you and your brother did not really go into the journalism to be writers, translators, but you became a doctor and your brother became a scientist. But your ability to speak different languages, probably you speak with your wife Italian. Do you? Yes,
well,
you speak Italian and you speak German and you learn some Polish. So this is your DNA, and it's probably after your parents. So it's something, because I was always curious.
well,
How is it?
When it comes to Polish, I think there is a mutation, a gene rearrangement, so something doesn't work quite right. I have been trying to learn Polish for the longest time. Believe it or not, actually, many of you know Professor Krakowski, spent 3 years trying to teach me Polish. Congratulated me on knowing the grammar and never being able to say a word. So at any rate,
You understand
on the other
probably.
hand, I did learn with him a tremendous admiration for Polish literature, and the courses in Polish literature that I had with him were incredible.
And I have one more thing to add. It's about your mother, because it seems to me when I read through the book and the story you have told us, that she truly understood Polish patriotism, culture, and history. You can see this with her translations. And also, as a researcher, a historian, I research, you may not know about it, Polish Information Center. So the organization that she worked for during Second World War in New York City, it was the Polish government in exile sponsored. And I was always, and I never knew how it was possible that the translations, the Polish review was so well written. And now I can know why. I never knew that Elizabeth was a senior translator, that she was translating most of the articles, because they were in excellent language quality. So I truly want to congratulate you and thanks Elizabeth, because of her, American public could learn more about Poland and Polish state during the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One last thing, it would be a pleasure and an honor for me, for all of you who are present, to please accept a copy of the book before you leave. I think they're piled here. If there's not enough, there is another package and you can open it. Thank you very much.
An ordinary person, an extraordinary time. I'm always wondering, and I think Ivona, you can correct me, how we could speak about the history, how we can tell why history is important. And I think mostly through personal stories we can discover these great facts, problems, etc., etc. Everybody here, as we can see, can discover Elizabeth Munk Clark from his or her own perspective, children's perspective, researcher's perspective, patriotic perspective, or just and everyday life perspective. Robert, thank you very much for this wonderful cooperation. It was a great honor and privilege. Once again, as said, the book is available for you for free. If you'd like to donate something for the Piłsudski Institute for hosting us today, it is well received. Thank you very much for finding time, especially it's extremely hot, but I hope we cool you down at least a bit and show you that the history is really important. Thank you very much for the time.
And I have one more thing to add. We all invite Dr. Robert and talk to family members and learn probably more. And I hope that we will see you some other time also. And remember, the family papers are here, so you can always come and read. Probably you may want to learn Polish because most of them are in Polish. And then, be with us and celebrate Polish history and culture because this is part of our life. So thank you again for coming. Sign on our mailing list, and we will see you here again. Thank you.